And all we need is for our people from New Zealand to put in an appearance. I have a video from Australia, and we could reverse the order and go to Australia first, and then to New Zealand. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can ask a few Australians on here to chime in. Annette, I'm making you a co-host. Allison, just on the off chance that you're a particular Allison I'm looking for, I'm making you a co-host. Is it possible I really have lost my mind and it's not time to go to New Zealand? Where? Oh, here is a message that says Australia is first. Well, let's go to Australia first. Annette, would you be willing to speak up for 30 seconds?
You've got a video from us, David. You've got a whole pre-record video.
Okay, I'm starting the video. Here we go.
Right.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Peace Wave. This is coming to you from the Pacific Ocean, Bondi Beach, Sydney, Australia. And that behind me is the big Pacific. What a peace wave this is. I'm Alison Bronowski, and I'm doing the Sydney segment this hour. We're delighted to be with you on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Unfortunately, I'm not able to stay with you for the whole session, but my friend and colleague Annette Brownlee from IPAN, Independent Peaceful Australia Network, is going to do the various segments of the program and tell you about her work as well. We hope you enjoy it, and we'd be delighted to have your comments and reactions, and we hope it feeds into a wave that spreads from the Pacific Ocean right around the world. Thanks a lot.
Greetings to you all around the world on this peace wave. I come to you from Meanjin, otherwise known as Brisbane, Australia, the land of the Turrbal and Jagera people that have lived on this land for over 60,000 years, the world's longest continuing culture of people. And I pay my respects to their elders and to all First Nations people who might be listening to this recording. The long history of First Nations is now coming to be better understood in this country. We hope that with the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which I urge you to Google if you do not know anything about it, that this will be a major step towards Australia becoming a more peaceful nation within this country. And we are accepting the hand of First Nations people to make that happen. My name is Annette Brownlee. I'm the chair of the Independent Peaceful Australia Network, a network that brings together organisations and individuals from across Australia. And our purpose really is to work towards a country that has greater control over our foreign policy, and a foreign policy that is based on human rights, abiding with the United Nations laws, international laws that exist, rather than the rules-based order as imposed on people around the world by the United States of America. We work very hard to on various campaigns, and including the campaign for freedom for one of our own citizens, Julian Assange, currently at risk of being extradited to the United States, and if found guilty of the charges that have been made against him, faces the rest of his life in prison. So collaborating with the International Peace Bureau and World Beyond War is really valuable. The international collaboration of peace activists is what will see us move towards a transition away from militarism and war, and instead have the focus, as it should be, on addressing the genuine security threats that we face, the security threats of climate change. And just today we hear about massive heat waves occurring throughout Europe, and Australia has suffered the most devastating flooding season over the past 6 months. So these genuine security threats are what we really do need to address. And war and militarism is a huge roadblock to that happening. So this Peace Wave initiative by the International Peace Bureau, World Beyond War, is very welcome. And I know that it will add to our combined efforts towards peace. I hope you enjoy the following contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Hi, everyone. I'm back to introduce the program. I'm Alison Bronowski, President of Australians for War Powers Reform. Our program for today's Peace Wave is in 3 parts. It's about threats to peace, climate change, and hope for the future. In between the items, we'll have music from 2 Australian choirs, a bit of Australian TV satire, and we hope you enjoy it and it supports the wave for peace across the world.
Hello, my name's Jordan Steele-John. I'm one of the Australian Greens senators. I'm coming to you from the land of the Noongar Whadjuk people of Western Australia. I'm the party spokesperson for foreign affairs, for peace and for nuclear disarmament. As a long-term peace campaigner, it is a really exciting opportunity to be speaking with you today as we are, as this kind of ancient continent, positioned in the Asia Pacific at a moment in time where the need for an active, engaged, community-grounded peace movement has never been more real. We know in this region that there are tensions rising between the United States and between the People's Republic of China, and that there are a number of steps that Australia has taken to this point which have inflamed those tensions. We have joined the AUKUS alliance with the United Kingdom and with the United States of America. We continue to host a rotation of Marines through our northern territories. We continue to host foreign military bases on Australian soil. And we continue to plunge billions of dollars as a nation into the acquisition and maintenance of new military programs and expansion of military footprint more broadly, and acquisition of new deadly weapons. All of these things undermine peace and sustainability in the region. They distract from the key work that must be done to address the root causes of conflict, to deal with their social, economic and contextual determinants, and to build sustainable, community-grounded peace movements, both within Australia and within the broader region. Promoting, supporting, advocating for, campaigning for that work is at the core of who the Australian Greens are. Our 4th pillar is that of a commitment to peace and non-violence. And in our role as the Foreign Affairs team for the Greens, we have been and will continue to advocate for a peace-based approach to international relations. We're pushing very hard as a team for Australia to scrap the AUKUS agreement, to reject the idea of acquiring nuclear submarines, to sign Australia up to the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, and to implement a reduction in overall expenditure on military equipment in favour of a reallocation towards addressing those social, economic and contextual determinants of conflict. We know that we need now more than ever strong international structures to help mediate conflict, to transform conflict from a violent dynamic to one of peace building and the maintenance and expansion of peace. There are historical examples where Australia has played a really useful role in promoting global peace, particularly in crafting and supporting the crafting of the resolution to the war in Cambodia. We have played useful peacekeeping roles in other aspects of the region too, but far too often the role of Australia has been to support the United States in the spreading of violence, war and conflict, and the increase of tensions, either in the Asia-Pacific or in the Middle East as well. This is a role that we need to reject, that the Greens reject. We are really looking forward to working with the Australian peace movement, with the Australian climate movement, with the Australian anti-racism movement to build intersectional coalitions to promote peace and to build community both within Australia and within the broader region. Thank you for the work that you're doing to contribute to this global movement. It is needed now more than ever. And together I am confident that we will be able to push back the tide of violence and connect with community in such a way as to build a globally engaged movement for peace and disarmament everywhere in the world. Thank you very much.
Here it was waiting for us, the greatest gift any nation has ever been given. An island, a continent of their own and a border with nobody. All we had to do to keep it is be in it, be in the region. Be in the region and be happy to be in the region. What a gift. What a gift. You know, what was it, just virtually a handful of us, you know. But no, we're not happy to be in the region. We're still trying to find our security from Asia rather than in Asia. So here we had the Prime Minister going back to Cornwall, where James Cook had left 245 years earlier, and where Arthur Phillip and the First Fleet had left 233 years earlier. Here we are back there to find our security from Asia. I mean, the ignominy of it, the appalling ignominy of it speaks volumes about our incapacity to absorb the region, enjoy the region, be part of the region, and to celebrate the fact we've been here. The area that matters most to Australia, the area which should be our strategic habitat, is the Indonesian archipelago. 250 million people in an arc across the northern reaches of Australia, a central part of ASEAN. This should be where, and in my time as Prime Minister, where I focused most particularly, and other as well, but particularly myself. This is where we matter most. But instead of that, we've now got this sort of fiction, you know, the thing called the Indo-Pacific, like a big rectangular box. You know, and on one end of the box is India, and the other end of the box is Japan. But in other words, we're not focusing on the middle of the box, which is Indonesia and ASEAN. We're on either end. It's like a seesaw at the park. You know, we're on the wobbly ends, but not the pivot at the middle, right? And of course, this is just a fiction. I've taken the view always that engagement with China and its absorption of the region will establish a better framework for both China and the United States to work in, including Australia. And China simply too big and too central to be ostracised. You know, my point is that China is now so big and is going to grow so large, it will have no precedent in modern economic or social history, and therefore our challenge is to have the United States remain as the balancing and conciliating power in Asia, which I've said over and over again, but have it come to a point of accommodation where it acknowledges China's preeminence in East Asia and the Asian mainland, in which case we can start to move towards a sensible relationship again with China instead of taking... Now, look, the Chinese are in their rude phase, you know, they're in the adolescent phase of their diplomacy, they've got testosterone running everywhere, you know, but we have to deal with them because their power will be so profoundly big in this part of the world. So, you know, here we are running to Cornwall to find our security in Asia. I mean, really, you know. So we are at odds with our geography, and we have lost our way. This is the key point. China does not represent a contiguous threat to Australia. I mean, I think, look, the key point is this, I think, is that China is not about turning over the existing world order. It only wants to reform it. And it wants to reform it because of its own scale, right? It's signed up to the WTO. It's signed up to the IMF. It's signed up to the World Bank. It's signed up to the WHO, the World Health Organization. And as you read recently, it now wants to sign up to the TPP, you know. In other words, it's the proselytiser of globalisation in the world. It's not pursuing, this is not the old Soviet Union pursuing some international ideology, some, whether universal or otherwise. It wants to be in the existing order, has signed up the existing order, but wants it reformed so it's fair.
So Australia's ambassador to Washington, Arthur Sinodinos, has said something explicitly today, which has sort of been around in the background of the AUKUS arrangement, which is essentially that nuclear submarines give us the capacity to be forward in a forward strategic position in the South China Sea rather than in the defence of Australia.
Give us a break. Give us a break. Yeah, yeah.
So essentially, what should our defence posture be right now within that strategic framework? 8
submarines against China. When we get the submarines in 20 years' time, it'll be like throwing a handful of toothpicks at a mountain. A handful of toothpicks at a mountain. You know, I mean, Kim Beazley and I built the Collins-class submarines. You know, Kim always had the Admiral's hat on. I had the money and the guns, you know. I built the Collins, you know. I built the Anzac frigates. They were built for the defence of Australia. You know, their range was to stop any incoming vessels, military vessels, against us. What Sinodinos is talking about are attack-class submarines to attack, to contain Chinese submarines, the hunter-killer submarines, to attack them and knock them out. You know, now, what's that got to do with the defence of Australia, and what possible impact could we have militarily? You know.
So my final question to you before we go to my colleagues in Canberra is coming back to your point about Indonesia and ASEAN. You say that they should be at the centre of our thinking.
Yeah, sure.
How would that work? I mean, are you talking about sort of liaison with the Indonesian army?
Well, look, I put together, as you know, a security treaty with President Suharto and the government of Indonesia and the army of Indonesia with ANZUS words. It's the last thing I did as Prime Minister in November 1995, right? John Howard lost that with President Habibie over our skiting over Timor. You know, Habibie suspended it. But you just imagine if we'd have spent the last 25 years putting Indonesian officers through our staff colleges, 25 years in security terms with Indonesia and its army, instead of Iraq and Afghanistan, instead of Howard's little escapades, if we'd have stuck to my script Imagine how much safer Australia would be now if we were back to that relationship. I mean, we have now just a peripheral relationship with Indonesia, the central state in our security. The central state geographically for our security is Indonesia. We have a peripheral relationship with them. And of course, in ASEAN, every leader in ASEAN knows that we have no relationship with Beijing. So why would the Prime Minister of Malaysia or Singapore or Thailand talk to us about East Asia when we are non-speakies with the biggest power, the Chinese? If we'd have played our cards properly and weren't running off to Iraq and running off to, but focusing on where we live, on our geography, we would either be the Secretariat of ASEAN or at least a member. And where are we now? Nowhere.
And greetings, everyone. Firstly, a full and heartfelt acknowledgement of Whadjuk Noongar, whose generosity the people of South West Australia enjoy. Let's hope that the new Prime Minister Albanese's first and last words on election night see the full implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in this term of government. So I'm glad that Mike mentioned that as well. Gratitude to IPAN for inviting me to share a perspective which will probably be seen as outlandish, Pollyanna-ish, even, never mind. Someone's got to keep stating what I see as the bleeding obvious, that preparing for war is not the way to peace. Most people of faith would be anti-war, and there are lots of representatives of such groups within our IPAN community. But what about anti-militarism? Sadly, as you all know, Australia's history is replete with fighting wars on foreign soils on behalf of other nations, while still ignoring the frontier wars fought on this soil. Recently, we've had then Defence Minister Dutton beating the drums of war against China, not clever by any yardstick. Early signs from the new government don't look good either, except that there is better recognition of Pacific neighbours as sovereign states whom we must respect. But the commitment to the American alliance, described as dangerous by former Conservative Prime Minister Fraser, as Alison reminded us, is as strong as ever, as is commitment to the new AUKUS, tying us into the stupidest, not silliest I would say, but stupidest, spends on nuclear submarines with a $5.5 billion tag for getting out of the deal with France. Absolutely nothing except bad vibes to show for it. It should be in good relationship with all its neighbours and trading partners. That doesn't mean that we have to agree with everything another country does, and we used to have a good reputation for speaking up and acting upon human rights issues. Not anymore. Our treatment of asylum seekers has been appalling. Recent arrivals are just the beginning of future onslaughts as people have to flee from the ravages of the climate crisis. We should have been practicing sharing and generosity as a rich country, but instead we've resorted to torture and fear-mongering. Also, the ongoing disparity between living standards of the oldest living culture in the world and all the boat people, that's us, who've come to these shores since 1788, hardly gives us a clean slate in criticising others. Imagine for a moment if our defence budget was truly defensive only, cut to allow for patrol boats and patrol aircraft around our shores, but not buying submarines, especially nuclear, which would, if ever becoming a reality, probably be obsolete before they hit the water. However, there are pockets of hope and inspiration if we care to look for them. So despite the fact that recognisable peace movements have existed for over 100 years, like the International Peace Bureau, founded in 1891, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, founded in 1915, in the middle of the First World War, and although some would say such citizen movements have been ignored, we must acknowledge that there is a huge body of work and effort which has produced a raft of possibilities for the future. The League of Nations and its successor, the United Nations, formed with the very best of intentions, have often been stymied by vested interests. Consider the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. all of which could be met with ease if only the global community cut its addiction to militarism. For generations, ordinary citizens have been calling for an end to war, but I contend that we must also call for an end to militarism in all its insidious forms, with its tentacles reaching into so many unexpected places. It is the mindset of militarism which needs to change. We have seen the power of nonviolent revolutions in our time, but too often the benefits are short-lived. It seems that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Armed neutrality would be a huge shift for any Australian government to contemplate, and an even bigger challenge to mainstream mindsets, which would be the idea of social defence. It is possible for Australia to disagree with the US and to remain in good relationship. The same should be true of China, everybody's biggest trading partner. What is required is an independent foreign policy so that we can take our modest place on the world stage without being subservient to any nation. Soon, Australia will engage again in the Republic debate. Perhaps we could extend the options to a dual cutting of ties with the US as well, voting for independence both ways, so we could truly claim our sovereignty, which would only be possible if we had already embraced the Uluru Statement from the heart. As John Lander already quoted, I was going to finish with this too, our Pacific neighbours say, friend to all, enemy to none.
For coming in at such short notice. I thought the best way to proceed was to get everyone in the one room.
Good thinking.
Okay, you're all right. I'll come straight to the point. This white paper is recommending we spend close to $400 billion over the forward estimates. Now, at some point, the PM is going to be asked a very simple question. In order to protect us from which enemy?
It's so hard to say.
400 billion, pick one.
A regional player.
Specifically, Colonel.
An Indo-Pacific regional player.
More specifically?
Indo-Asia Pacific.
That's broader. Who are you leaving out?
Europe?
Yeah, I sort of need a country.
Or an unaligned player.
No, a country.
One that might threaten us. Just one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to raise tensions.
Where?
In this room.
You know what? I'll name one and you just nod. China. Yeah, OK. And what exactly are we protecting?
Strategic interests.
Specifically, Colonel?
Indo-Pacific strategic
Again,
interests.
Brigadier, really specifically.
Indo-Asia Pacific strategic
You know what?
interests.
I'll say it and then you nod. Our trade routes. Yeah. And who is our #1 trading partner?
Shall we use the nod system?
Sure. China? Yeah. So under this scenario, we're spending close to $30 billion a year to protect our trade with China from China. And that doesn't strike anyone at this table as odd?
I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking on land from which the Gadigal people were violently dispossessed. I acknowledge that the violence that deprived them of their land is still deeply embedded in the culture of so-called modern Australia. We need to learn how to live in peaceful coexistence by walking together and mutually engaging in the Makarrata process. The climate crisis makes the need for peace both within and between nations imperative. As this crisis intensifies, cooperation, collaboration and friendship are needed, not competition, animosity and enmity. The cry of the world's people must be, bring us peace. I've said it before and I'll say it again here now. Australia, like a bull with a ring in its nose, is being led meekly down a path that has war with China at its end. We are not sheltering under the wing of the American eagle. That eagle has got us in its talons. We've heard Peter Dutton say that Australia will join the USA if there is war between that nation and China. We're busily arming up, making expensive purchases and expanding the size of the ADF, all with war with China in mind. As a nation, we've become convinced that China is a dangerous potential enemy. Nothing could be further from Australia's true interests. We do not need China as an enemy. Now is the time to tell them that we neither need nor want nuclear-powered submarines, that we see AUKUS as more likely to bring war to our doorstep than keep it away. Now is the time to tell them that we fear nuclear proliferation more than we fear the ridiculous notion of a Chinese invasion. In the face of the climate crisis and in the quest for the real security we all need and crave, now is the time for us to cry out and demand of our leaders, bring us peace! Bring us peace! Bring us peace!
I've been asked to summarise environmental issues, and the submissions that have come in have addressed 5 issues: direct impacts of recent wars, fuel use and climate change, biosecurity risks, nuclear issues, and opportunity costs. In terms of direct impacts, the Afghanistan war has seen the loss of more than a third of forests in that country, the destruction of food-producing areas, drought, desertification, species loss, 85% fewer migratory birds. In terms of the Iraq war, in which we also enthusiastically participated, hundreds of tons of depleted uranium were deposited around the country, so there are now elevated radiation levels around Baghdad. Very significant amounts of pollution of air and water, sewage mains disrupted and sewage flowing into waterways, and hundreds of oil wells were set on fire. In Vietnam, there was enthusiastic deforestation, use of napalm and Agent Orange, and it's been estimated it will take up to a century for the mangrove forest to recover from what was done during that war, with catastrophic impact on ecological systems. Leslie has introduced the subject of climate change, and within that context, it's important to recognise that the military is a major user of prodigious amounts of fossil fuels. The US military alone emissions from their fossil fuel use are similar to that of a middle-sized country like Denmark. And that's when they're not doing anything, not fighting wars. It's been estimated that during the Iraq invasion, something like 190 million litres of oil were being used every month. And about 2/3 of that was being used to carry fuel forward to the vehicles that were engaged in military activity. This is the cartoonist Moya's summary of the Australian government's approach to climate change. And there's been a bit of excitement about the prospect that they might make an announcement about net zero. There's a misconception that they're interested in net zero emissions. What the government's net zero approach actually is zero policies, zero action, zero carbon price, zero restrictions on polluting industries, and zero responsibility for our activities. And just to be even-handed, Her Majesty's loyal opposition haven't actually been aggressive in their prosecution of the case for reducing our fossil fuel impact. You would think that a Labor government would be interested in responsible policies for a just transition, recognising that the coal industry will be phased out and trying to ensure that those who currently depend on that industry are not the casualties. In terms of submissions have pointed out that there are opportunity costs, things we can't do because we prioritise spending on the military. When he left office after 8 years as the US president, General Eisenhower reflected that every dollar spent on the military was a crime against those who are hungry, against those who are not properly housed, against those who don't have decent education or health care. And several submissions have pointed out that our huge military expenditure reduces the funds that are available for environmental protection, for slowing climate change, for restoring degraded landscapes, for saving what remains of our biodiversity, as well as for desirable social activities like housing the homeless, or ensuring that every child in Australia gets a decent education, however carelessly they chose their parents, or ensuring that everyone has access to proper health care. To conclude, warfare obviously in the short term has disastrous environmental impacts. There are too many recent examples to document, but I've given you enough to illustrate that point. The military is also a prodigious user of fossil fuels and therefore contributing significantly to climate change. And the nuclear sword of Damocles hangs over us all, and it's a serious existential threat to human civilization. And finally, I agree with the late General Eisenhower that every dollar spent on the military is a crime against those who hunger and are not fed, those who are homeless, those who don't have a proper education, reasonable health care, or access to the desirable features of modern life. Thank you very much.
Warm greetings from Walyalup, or Fremantle, in Western Australia. It's an honour to deliver a message to you on behalf of Stop AUKUS, Western Australia. We are a newly formed coalition. We support a peaceful and nuclear-free Indo-Pacific. We reject the push to contain China, which really means confront China, led by the US. We are entirely opposed to Australian participation in this dangerous war drive. The Australian government has recently spent $830 million in compensation to a French consortium for cancelling a contract for diesel-electric submarines. This comes in addition to $3.4 billion already spent on the project. However, Even more wasteful is the $170 billion that our government intends to spend on 8 nuclear-powered submarines, then another $10 billion on bases for them. Now, Australia's military expenditure has already increased by 130% in real terms since 2001 and is now running at more than $133 million per day. There are so many desperately needed social and environmental repair projects that this money, our money, could be spent on. But the issue is far bigger than that. The next 10 years are critical for humanity uniting together to prevent the existential threat posed by runaway global warming. All people and all nations need to cooperate if we are to succeed. But that is simply impossible if we instead spend billions of dollars on a new Cold War. Nobody can claim to be serious about confronting climate change while also gearing up for war. In truth, those that promote war spending are not preparing to prevent or mitigate climate change. Instead, they are preparing to respond to the likely crises with repression and war. But it doesn't have to be this way. Polling in 2021 showed that a majority of Australians, 57%, felt that Australia should remain neutral in the event of a conflict between China and the US. Well, that's good. But even better would be preventing the conflict in the first place. The 3 central and immediate objectives of Stop AUKUS Western Australia are: 1. No nuclear submarines, no nuclear ship visits or associated bases. 2. No AUKUS. 3. No US bases on Australian soil. Please join with us and help make this a reality. Our future depends on it. Thank you.
I'm Albert Palazzo, and I'm speaking to you today from the Gundungara land. And thank you to the organizers of this conference for asking me to speak here today. So I'm going to be talking about an alternate defense philosophy for Australia, a different way to think about our defense requirements and also our defense acquisitions and purchases. So I believe it's highly likely that later this year, Australia will commence another defense white paper review. I suspect that much will be said about China, the alliance with the United States, and weapons and policies needed to secure the future of Australia. If we are lucky, climate change will get an all too brief mention. Following tradition, the paper will argue for the expenditure of vast sums of money as well as extol the virtues of the dependence upon the United States. The white paper will have the look and feel of previous iterations, and any differences will be around the margins. Alas, I fear the white paper will not admit to any need to change the fundamentals of Australia's security philosophy. That is a pity, because in a changing world, it is essential to be open to new ideas, new options, and new methods if Australia is to succeed under the different technological, climatic, and geopolitical conditions that are coming, and some of which have arrived. In this short paper, I will introduce a different philosophical foundation for Australia's future security. Instead of more of the same, I believe Australia should base its defense projections on the philosophy known as the strategic defensive. The strategic defense is usually adopted by weak states who do not have territorial ambitions and who only want to maintain the status quo. Switzerland, Sweden, and Finland are strategically defensive states. And demilitarized states are those that accept that their survival depends on the goodwill of others. Costa Rica, Andorra, and a host of small island nations are examples of demilitarized states. Australia is an island continent which lacks natural enemies and resides in a part of the world that is distant from traditional points of tension. Theoretically, Australia should be a natural candidate for the strategic defensive. However, the Australian people have always lived in fear of invasion, no matter how unjustified, and see themselves as geographic outsiders. Australia has also never identified with a particular military philosophy. Instead, it aligns with a great power protector. The Australian Defence Force is designed to enable itself to be embedded within its partner's way of war. This means Australia, a natural strategic defensive state, mirrors in miniature a strategic offensive state, in this case, the United States. The result is incoherence in our policies. Now, if Australia wanted to become a strategic defensive state, recent technological advances actually work in our favor. Technological leaps in long-range precision strike missiles, sensor capabilities on land, sea, subsurface, air, and space, as well as drones and miniaturization, all favor the defender. The result is that offensive operations against a defensive-minded opponent have become harder and more expensive to wage. I wish to make it clear that I'm not advocating for a weaker or even non-existent defense force. I believe a nation's peace is best provided for by its military. What I want is a stronger, and what I really want is a more rational defense force. The adoption of the strategic defensive will not necessarily lead to a peace dividend, I'm afraid. It's not meant to be money-saving design. It's a reallocation of money to provide a defense force that is actually more suited for Australia's interests and for Australia's place in the world. It should also be clear that by the strategic defensive, I do not mean neutrality. I do not expect the propensity for humans to resolve their grievances by violence to disappear anytime soon, despite our desires for peace. Nor do I demand an end to the alliance with the United States. Australia entered into the alliance willingly and with its eyes open. In fact, Australia actually chased the United States. However, I do believe that the alliance needs to be rediscussed. It's time for a redefinition of roles and responsibilities. Additionally, the strategic defensive does not mean that the Australian Defence Force will not need the ability to inflict pain on an attacker. Being on the defense does not equate with being passive. Australian forces must still have the ability to maneuver and attack. What the defensive means is that Australia, when it does attack, does so from the perspective of protecting its interests, not imposing our interests on others. Lastly, I feel obligated to state quite clearly that nuclear weapons have no place in the philosophy of the strategic defensive. The adoption of these weapons would require Australia to have a willingness to risk escalation across the nuclear threshold and thereby commit suicide. And suicide, one has to recognize, as a silly defense policy. So why should we do this? Why should we adopt the strategic defensive? Why should we turn away from what we've been doing so far? The strategic defensive offers Australia the best option it has for survival in what is expected to be an increasingly dangerous world. It is not a call to embrace passivity or neutrality, nor to seek opportunities for violence and aggression, but rather to acquire awareness and strength and prioritization of our own interests. I am one with Vegetitus, that late 4th century Roman military theorist, whose words remain relevant for today. He who desires peace, let him prepare for war. And for me, the strategic defensive is the best way to make that preparation. Thank you for your time.
Firstly, I want to begin, though, by acknowledging country. I'm coming to you from Larrakia country in Darwin, and I want to acknowledge the First Nations that are the owners of the country from wherever you're coming from today. I pay, on behalf of all of us, we pay our respects to the peoples and their elders past and present. Firstly, a bit about myself. My name is Thomas Mayer. I'm a Torres Strait Islander man. I'm an official of the Maritime Union of Australia, and I'm an author of the strategically placed books behind me. And I'm the facilitator today. I'm an advocate for the Uluru Statement from the Heart, among many other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that have built a movement from pretty much complete dismissal from where most Australians didn't even know about it to a place where we have great momentum and the opportunity to fundamentally change who we are as Australians, the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in this country, and then also the practical and pragmatic ways that we can finally close the gap. But I'm not the speaker today. That's just a bit of an overview about what we're talking about. I'm going to introduce our speakers, our panel members today. We have Dean Parkin from the From the Heart campaign, Nicola Pepper from the Sydney Alliance, and Craig Cromlin from the Land Council in Orange. The first speaker that I'll invite is Quandamooka man Dean Parkin.
Hello, Brother Thomas. And thank you for the opportunity to join this awesome panel today. Obviously, I want to pay my respects to the people, the land on which I'm gathered, and that's my own country. I'm very, very fortunate to be in the position to be home here. I'm in Jurabah, which is also known as North Stradbroke Island. And it's obviously a very personal thing for me to acknowledge my own elders, both those that have gone before and those that are still with us. I'm the director of From the Heart, as Thomas said, and From the Heart is the campaign born out of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And our focus is very, very specifically on achieving a successful referendum on the first reform, the voice to Parliament with the constitutional guarantee. An extraordinarily generous achievement. 430 words, the Uluru Statement is. I'm hoping most of you have read it. It only takes 3 minutes. I'm sure most of you have. So it was a great privilege to be part of that. I think the one thing that I'd like to do, and I don't want to talk too much, you can find out more from fromtheheart.com.au. I'd encourage you to please sign up and join the campaign. The one message I'd really like to leave with you is actually there's an incredible amount of momentum behind us right now. 18 months on, in the midst of a global pandemic, and we did the polling when Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane were all in a hard lockdown. The numbers have risen 8 points from 49% to 57% would vote yes in a referendum. The no's have dropped from 20 to 16% and 25% are undecided. And one of the interesting things about those undecideds is that the more that they are aware of and understand what's being proposed with a voice, the more that they understand that it is a very practical measure for our people and a very fair measure for our people, the more likely they are to support it.
It was remiss of me to mention this in the introduction, that when we are all gathering here in the interest of peace, the Uluru Statement is very much a document that is about peace. They are proposals about peace. The Uluru Statement says that the culmination of our agenda is Makarrata. And that means that to be able to, so firstly, Makarrata is a Yolngu word for the coming together after a struggle. It is a dispute resolution process. And if we are to achieve peace, then we can learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, from Makarrata, the longest continuing culture on this planet, about how to resolve disputes and come together after a struggle. The reason why, Dean, also, just to put words in your mouth, brother, it's not a selfish thing to say that voice must come first. It's actually very, very logical. It should be selfish for all of us, because if we want to achieve peace, if we want First Nations to be in the centre of decision-making and sharing our wisdom and experience in political decisions, then the very first thing we need to establish is a representative body to have a voice to be able to begin that process. But, our next panellist that I'd like to welcome to introduce himself in greater detail is Craig Cromlin. Craig was at Uluru, and he's got some very, very special feelings that he had to share with us. Craig?
My name's Craig Cromlin. I'm a proud Yampa Wiradjuri man. I come from a little Aboriginal community called Murrumbidge, which is more or less central New South Wales, near a larger town which is called Lake Angelica. Back when the Uluru Statement was fought for and argued for by some key people that was involved, Auntie Pat Anderson, certainly Megan Davis and Noel Peace, fought for the ability to get some conversations up and around the country, which they were lucky to even get that little bit. I was a councillor with New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council. I was a councillor from 2007 through till 2019. For a period, 2014 to 15, I was the chairperson of the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council. My observation when look, I'm not someone who likes to stand at the front, although all my life I've been a chairperson. I'm a humble person. I like to let people step forward and have their conversation. When the going gets tough, that's when I step forward. But when I went up to the Uluru Statement and saw all of the people, all the mob that come from all over, and we had young, we had old, and I mean that with a great deal of passion and affection, not from the old status, but my hair's a little bit thinning these days. And I was so inspired by the knowledge that was around the table there, people that I've seen, in the trenches fighting for Aboriginal rights, sitting there talking with young, articulate Aboriginal people that are going through universities, colleges, etc., that are walking different paths, that are now prepared to take up that fight that these fellas and these ladies were involved 20, 30 years ago. And what was even more pleasing was when they finally put the Uluru Statement together. Everything that I observed out at Dubbo, everything that I observed in Western Sydney Forum, and certainly everything that I observed in our particular group that I was involved in was captured in that statement. And I sat there, and it was this wonderful, powerful urge of emotions that were just captured and released once they put that statement up, and everyone in that room rose and stood as one. And I can honestly say all of my life, I've never stood for the national anthem as a kid. I mean, I go back to the days when we used to have God Save Our Gracious Queen as our national anthem. I can remember not standing for the current national anthem, still don't. But on that day, I stood with such pride that just overwhelmed everyone. And it was such a powerful experience to be a part of. The traditional owners of country and the way Aunt held us all together when there was rumblings and grumblings that took place in the hall. She said, "My people, we got to come together." My goodness, it was such a wonderful thing. Very lovely people, wonderful people. They come up, the first thing they said, "Craig, how wonderful was that Uluru Statement?" I said, "I was there." "Oh, how wonderful was that?" They said, "How can we be involved?" So it's out there. People want to be involved in it. We've got to keep the motion or the movement going. I know it's going. And kudos to Thomas, to Dean, who's been still at the coalface of it all, still pushing. And there are others around that are doing all of this wonderful thing. But I know that there is people out there that want to be a part of it. They want to sign on. And look, if there are some things in life that you experience that you know that you'll never forget, and that's one of them. That's one of the greatest things that I've experienced in all my life, from a leadership thing, from being involved, not for my personal self, but it involves me. It involves my family, and I know that when my time on this earth finishes, that it will capture my great-grandchildren that are now just starting to be born into this world. So much, there's a lot of hard work from people behind the scenes that are sitting there that make this thing happen, as was the case with Ulleru's statement, and anything that is worthwhile happening, whether it's in your community or regional or statewide or Australia-wide. It takes a lot of work. So thank you to everyone, and thank you from my heart.
Come all men and women and children as well, a song I will sing and a tale I will tell. While the world's weapons grow every minute each day, the whole human race calls to throw them away. So come people for peace, come people of love, come raise up your voices on high. Sing of your dreams and all they may bring. Don't you ever just let them pass by. Don't you fall for the false lullaby. On high, sing of your dreams and all they may bring. Don't you ever just let them pass by. Don't you fall for the false lullaby. Come people for peace, come people of love, come raise up your voices on high. Sing of your dreams and all they may bring. Don't you ever just let them pass by. Don't you fall for the false lullaby.
Well, let's applaud. Everybody's muted, but they're applauding the peace people of Australia. And I believe we're moving on to New Zealand. Is that right?
Yes, we are. We're starting with a video. Kia ora. Ashley's just about to play our first video. So welcome everybody. Thank you, Australia. Thank you, Alison and Annette and everybody. That was a wonderful contribution. Ashley, are you with us?
I am. It's just video doesn't appear on my share screen options. Let's try. I'll try this.
Okay.
Can you see the video now?
We see a lot of different things.
Okay.
So you want the one, I'd just like to say a big thanks to David Swanson, who is part of the team from World Beyond War and International Peace Bureau, who's put this amazing compilation together from all around the world. And I know how much work it's been. Thank you so much, David and everybody. So how are we getting on, Ashley?
I'm not really sure what's happening. The video's on my screen, and when I press share screen, every other screen option I've got appears except for the video.
And you tried sharing the desktop and then going to the video?
Yeah, that should be up. I can try this one. It might be coming up.
Yeah, it's a really ambitious project to do this, and we haven't rehearsed it. I don't know why, but it's just jumping in the deep end. There we go.
Can you see that?
Yep, here we go.
Awesome.
This is the Hawke's Bay Soul Choir. It's a privilege to be here today to celebrate peace, love, and unity. Heidi, my everyone, let your idle heart increase. We're all here to celebrate all these posts of peace. You can sing and dance with us, everybody clap your hands. It feels so good when we're together, come on and sing and dance. This is fun for the harmonica. Come on, you can do it, guys. For peace, for the Poles. Beautiful day here in Hastings. It's great to see you all.
Kororia kite atua, mangarongo kite tenua, rangi marie kinga tamata katoa.
Break it down now. None of us, 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 none of us are free. Yeah.
Rangaranga te pō, rangaranga te ao. Ki te whai ao, ki te ao marama e. Ka tū au I raro I te maru o ngā tūpuna kei wainganui I a koutou. Nau mai whakatau mai rā ki te taha o tō mātou mokopuna mo tēnei kaupapa nui o te ao. I stand under the shelter of our tupuna, our ancestors, who are with us today and every day, and I invite them to guide and support this conversation for peace throughout the world. Before we continue, let me clear the way and set the intention for all those present, both seen and unseen. Whakawātea te Māori. Hūtea te whāha ai o. Ngā o te au ia whānau whakawhirinaki, wau te ira I te hihiri, ai o tia te ahi ko haumako, ai o te pai haumako, ai o te pai ngā whā, ai o te ururu tawakina, wātea te ai o, rire hau, pai mārire, ka pai. Ko wai au, ko taupiri te maunga, ko waikato te awa, ko tūranga waiwai te marae, ko pōtatau te wherowhero te tangata. Waikato is my river. Tūranga waiwai is my marae. And pōtatau te wherowhero is my ancestor. Ko mere aina he rangi ahau. My name is Mere Aina Hirangi. Sister to my great-grandfather, Te Puia Kirihai Hirangi was a leader who gave hope to the helpless, strength to the weak, spoke with purpose, and led with an iron fist and a velvet glove. The epitome of mana wahine, powerful woman. At the outbreak of World War I, Māori from Taranaki, Maniapoto and Waikato resisted the call to fight for king and country because our lands had been confiscated in the 1860s as punishment for rebellion against the crown, and the wounds were still very, very fresh. Nana Te Puia maintained that her grandfather, Kingi Tāwhiao, had forbidden Waikato from taking up arms again when he made peace with the Crown in 1881. Tāwhiao was a pacifist and a man of peace and non-violence, unlike his father and forefathers who followed the traditions of Tūmatauenga, the Atua, the god of war. Nana Te Puia was determined to uphold his call to Waikato to lie down and not allow blood to flow from this time on. Te Puia maintained that Waikato had its own king and had no need to fight for the British king. She proposed that if confiscated land were returned, Waikato might reconsider its position. When police officers came to arrest the men who refused conscription, Te Puia welcomed them into the whare, the meeting house, and gave them an opportunity to speak. Te Puia then rose to reply, first greeting the people present and the police party. Then she said, "These people are my people. My voice is their voice. I will not agree to my children going to shed blood. Though your words be strong, you will not move me to help you. The young men who have been balloted will not go. You can fight your own fight until the end." Many of my ancestors were imprisoned and taken to Auckland for refusing to go to war. Nana Te Puia would take them whatever food she could find, whatever she could gather, and sit for hours outside the prison walls, singing her songs of resistance, resilience, and love to boost the morale and give courage to her people. I leave you with her words. Ka moe moe a hau, ko auanaki. Ka moe moe a tātou, ka tai a tātou. If I dream alone. If we all dream, we can achieve. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, pai mārire.
Kia ora. Welcome everybody from Aotearoa and from around the world. Can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, David. My name is Liz Remiswell and I am with World Beyond War in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and very pleased to be part of this amazing day, Peace Wave, 24-hour global peace wave. And we have just heard from Mere Aina Hirangi, who has beautifully introduced herself and this wonderful kaupapa or purpose of peace that we're sharing here across the waters and across the land. And before that, we had the Peace Pole Day in Hastings. We had 43 peace poles in 86 languages in a very special function with the Hawke's Bay Soul Choir in it. Our next person is Linda Hansen. She's a writer, and writing as L.P. Hansen, an author and a storyteller for peace. And she is going to share some more of the history of peace in this country, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you, Linda. Are you there, Linda? Are you unmuted?
I am now. Thank you. You can all hear me? Good.
Yep.
Gandhi called non-violence a force, a universal force like electricity. Non-violence is positive action, demanding the highest intelligence and courage. And many in these islands have honoured this force. Their stories are linked together on an indestructible thread. At this end is New Zealand's Christchurch call to end violence online. But for the other end, we must go back hundreds of years. Ocean currents are taking voyages from Polynesia to islands east of New Zealand they call Reikahu, the rising sun. They are people later known as Moriori, Polynesians with their own customs and traditions. They are not Māori. As their numbers increase, tensions grow, and at last a very great leader, Nunuku Whenua, demands an end to tribal fighting. It's not easy, but the people obey, starting more than 500 years of a society free from killing. They prosper, settling their differences by wrestling and stick fighting. They honour non-violence and they wear white feathers in their hair as a sign of peace. 500 years later, two warring Māori tribes from Taranaki invade to seize the islands. The Moriori offer to share. It's their way, a handful of former sealers and whalers already farmed beside them. But the invaders walk the land, killing and taking as slaves those they find. Now the Moriori have hunting weapons and numbers to drive these strangers out. But so dedicated are they to the principle of Nunuku Whenua, to the voice of life speaking through them, they will not use the weapons against people. They all agree. So Moriori are killed, they are eaten or taken as slaves, and even though slavery is already illegal on the mainland, Governor Grey and other Europeans watch the genocide and do nothing. It is a dark time, but in faraway Taranaki is a 5-year-old boy already able to hear the voice of life. Was there ever a time that Te Whiti o Rongomai did not know the peaceful wisdom of Nunuku Whenua? By the time Moriori slaves are freed 30 years later, Te Whiti with his friend Tohu are helping to build the peaceful settlement of Parihaka, and he is calling Māori back from Reikahu to help. Parihaka becomes the centre of a non-violent campaign to resist European settlement on land confiscated from Māori. In Parihaka, men who have killed are now living peacefully. They're even wearing white feathers in their hair. The government surveys the land, they plough up the survey pegs. They're given a 14-day deadline to move into reserves. They stay. 1,600 troops with guns march on Parihaka, led by Government Minister John Bryce. Several thousand Māori sit quietly on the marae, singing children off of fresh-baked bread to the travellers. Bryce orders the invasion, the arrest of Parihaka's leaders, the village destroyed and its inhabitants dispersed. Yes, there were many horrors on that day, but there are no accounts of any deaths on either side. The fruits of violence have shed more seeds. Te Whiti and Tohu are held without trial for 16 months, yet Parihaka is rebuilt. The pair live on into their 70s, able to pass on their wisdom. In India, Gandhi hears of Tufiti and is recorded as keeping a photograph of him on his desk. You have just heard the most wonderful account of Tupuia, whose grandfather was friend to Tufiti. Waikato Māori are amongst many thousands of other New Zealanders offering non-violent resistance to conscription into World Wars I and II. Ronald Briggs and Archie Baxter are two conscientious objectors. They influenced world opinion when they spoke about how they were kidnapped, taken to the battlefronts in Europe and tortured. But like others in this story, they would not resort to violence. They could not. Archie Barrington and many others offered similar resistance in World War II, a war it brought to a horrific end by the use of atomic weapons. The United Nations' first resolution in 1946 was for the elimination of atomic weapons. Slowly, we move towards it. New Zealanders are filling many key roles. In the 50s, Elsie Locke and Mary Woodward helped found the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament that became the foundation for Greenpeace. A few years later, that group presented to New Zealand's Parliament its second largest petition ever, calling for the Southern Hemisphere nuclear-free zone. Labour Prime Minister Norman Kirk sends a frigate right into the testing zone to protest against France's nuclear tests. A few years later, another Labour Prime Minister, David Lange, successfully argues that the morally indefensible state of nuclear weapons. It's the same year that the French bomb the Rainbow Warrior, the flagship of Greenpeace, and murder a crewman. A couple of years later, New Zealand becomes officially nuclear-free, still the only country in the world to be so by law. In 1997, the United Nations has a model nuclear weapons convention circulated, and one of its two creators is New Zealand's Alan Ware. Alan receives the prestigious Right Livelihood Award for his ongoing work to rid the world of nuclear weapons. New Zealand's Otago University founds its National Centre for Peace and Conflict Study. The next year, Thomas Nash, another New Zealander, is key to achieving the international ban on cluster bombs. 2017, Thomas Nash is at the forefront again of the coalition that brings about the first ever prohibition of nuclear weapons ban treaty, a United Nations event in New York that brings that group the Nobel Peace Prize. In May 2019 comes Labour Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern with her Christchurch call to get rid of terrorist and extremist content online. As you know, it's signed by a large group of tech companies and 17 governments and is ongoing. That's in my 5 minutes. I've galloped through 700 years of peacemaking in a very young country, but it's a lightning tour that I hope you've enjoyed, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Linda. Next, we have some TV news.
Protesters have picketed outside Rocket Lab's Auckland headquarters, calling for an end to its military-related satellite launches. The company's launched numerous satellites for foreign militaries with sign-off from the government. Sign-off from the government, but the Green Party wants to see the practice banned.
I think we're having a few technical problems here. So, Ashley, while you're buffering that video, I'm going to ask our former Minister of Disarmament and Arms Control, Matt Robson, to talk to us from Auckland. Welcome, Matt. You need to unmute Matt, please. Matt, can you unmute, please?
Yes, I was doing that, having technical problems myself, and everybody should have someone under 13 in their house when this happens. Power to the youth. A katangi te tite, katangi te kaka, a katangi hoki aho, e ti hei Māori ora. Those are the voices of birds of New Zealand and bringing you the breath of life. It's an important day for us in New Zealand, in fact, an important number of days. We have a new public holiday called Matariki, which is the site of looking to the heavens for the new year, celebrated by Māori for centuries. It's a time of joining with nature to recognize its power, and human beings working in harmony for the new season, clearing for planting, looking forward to the spring. Remember, we are in the Southern Hemisphere, and the coming summer. It's a call for peace as well, and it's recognition of the Indigenous people of New Zealand and the long road that we still have to go to having justice. Because that brings us to the fact that New Zealand was a white settler colony from Europe, part of the British Empire. And it was founded, unfortunately, on war and dispossession. And that extended later into the Pacific, when New Zealand was the proxy power for the British Empire in seizing territories and visiting violence on the peoples of the Pacific. That was being part of the British Empire meant we were part of war across the world. And if you travel through Europe, you'll see the thousands of young New Zealanders who lie under the soil with workers and people of many other countries. So that's part of our tradition, but there is a side of resistance and movements to peace, which is very much part of what we are. There's been moving stories about the role of Te Puia, a Māori leader, woman leader of the Waikato, leading resistance, and also recognition of the dispossession of Māori people in the First World War. That opposition to the First World War and to the imperialism of that war was taken up by the founding Labour Party in 1916, and many of the leaders of the Labour Party went to jail in opposition to the war and also in support of the people of Ireland for their independence from the British Empire. But in 1914, a Labour Prime Minister set the tone that where Britain goes, we go in the Second World War. And that was really to show you that New Zealand had this tradition of being an integral part of war making. After the Second World War, we shifted alliance and allegiances to the United States. And our history led us into the war in Korea, into the war against the people of Indochina and the war crimes committed there, and in testing in the Pacific for the colonial powers. But a resistance grew up, and the war against the peoples of Indochina and the war crime that it was became something that the New Zealand people rebelled against. It was a pivotal time for the change in New Zealand's population, grasping the idea that we must be a country with an independent foreign policy to break free of what Bob Dylan called the masters of war. And that was successful. Opposition to testing in the Pacific after the Vietnam War grew strongly. That was led by Māori, who had a recognition that their family in the Pacific were the victims of testing. And out of that grew a powerful anti-nuclear movement. By succeeding with the anti-nuclear movement and with legislation in 1987 to make New Zealand nuclear free, both in terms of arms and power, and also to then help to forge the nuclear free status of the South Pacific in a treaty across the whole of the Pacific. New Zealand became known to the whole world as a country in the forefront of peace. And this was the work of the people of New Zealand. And it was a contribution to peace for the people of New Zealand. And I, as Minister of Disarmament and Arms Control in the government led by Prime Minister Helen Clark and Deputy Prime Minister Jim Anderton, was authorized to go to the world and say that New Zealand was going to help to free the world of nuclear weapons. And that meant that we would stay out of the military blocs that we had been evicted from. ANZUS was one of them, by becoming nuclear free. I was able to tell the governments of NATO that we would not join with them as a nuclear armed bloc, and one that was aggressive throughout the world with over 1,000 bases spread around the world. We saw that as backward and as not contributing to peace. I'm sorry to say that we have gone backwards a little bit with this, and we're not in the forefront at the moment in terms of the fight for peace throughout the world at the government level. Our present Minister of Disarmament, a friend and colleague of mine, Phil Twyford, has been sent to the Treaty Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Review Conference in Vienna. He's a minister outside of cabinet, and he's promoting the treaty and doing a very good job to do it. At the same time, our Prime Minister is heading to Madrid to tell NATO that we are joining up to their plans for war in Europe and their plans for war against China and North Korea in the Pacific, and that we are taking part as a global partner of nuclear-armed NATO. It's a step back for New Zealand. But we are hopeful in New Zealand that the strength of the people will reach back to that tradition of tapuia, back to the first leader of the Labour Party, Harry Holland, an immigrant from Australia who came to New Zealand for 14 years, led a battle against imperialist policies in New Zealand, in the Pacific, and in the world to try and set that course for the Labour Party. We want to recover that. We want to be able to make sure that the voice of New Zealand is one that is the voice that I was authorised to have under Prime Minister Helen Clark and Deputy Prime Minister Jim Anderton. And that is that New Zealand will be in the forefront of all the nations of the world, fighting for a nuclear-free world, a world free of war, and a world that looks to give justice to all people. I thank those who brought this together today. I know how difficult it can be, particularly when things go wrong with the technology. But our audience is one that's forgiving on that basis and knows the efforts of those who put this together. So my greetings to you all. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you.
Protesters have picketed outside Rocket Lab's Auckland headquarters, calling for an end to its military-related satellite launches. The company's launched numerous satellites for foreign militaries with sign-off from the government, but the Green Party wants to see the practice banned.
Whether we go into a war or not, I think we should never. We shouldn't, but we also shouldn't be privatising that out to companies like Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab is a US military contractor. Let's be very clear about that.
Rocket Lab says it does not launch payloads that contribute to weapons programs or nuclear capabilities, adding billions of people rely on defence satellite technology like Google Maps, which is powered by satellites run by the US Air Force.
An incident unfolded this morning on the North Shore whereby 4 members
Thank you for your talk, Matt, and for the news item, all those people protesting outside Rocket Lab. We're now going to hear from Deirdre McMenamin, who hails from Belfast, has been a peacemaker for many years. And Deirdre has presented a PowerPoint for us as soon as we can get it going. So how are we doing, Ashley?
Well, I thought you could all see it until you started speaking. So let me see. Can you see it now?
Just a blank screen at the moment.
Black screen with stripes.
I could see it before.
While we're getting that, oh, here we go.
Okay.
Kia ora whānau, thank you so much for coming. coming today and being part of this wave of peace around the world. I'm going to share with you a few of my tools. Kia ora whānau. This is Lay Down Your Arms, which we did in Northern Ireland in 1994, where we took plaster arm casts of people's arms and then made them up in clay. And we cast people who were in conflict with each other. So at the time it was like paramilitaries and policemen and prisoners and you know, a whole range. We cast about 100 people's arms, and where we could, we negotiated with them to be cast together, because a handshake is a sign of peace. So we tried to do that, and we didn't know at the time, but stroking the forearm is actually connected to your inner child healing, so it helped on lots of different ways. This is after the Christchurch situation, where we did some casting and around the country, and I think those are from Wellington, those images, but we did more casting to try to call for the laying down of arms to actually negotiate a ceasefire, which was successful, obviously. These are examples of, you know, recognizing the connection between peace and the planet. The place in Northern Ireland that I come from, all the trees were cut down 400 years ago towards building a military navy. You know, that was 400 years ago. It's still happening now, and we're seeing denuded parts of the planet destroyed daily still, because we're not making the connection. And trees know this, and they send sugars to fallen neighbours, and so we need to send sugars to our fallen neighbours, and that was the idea behind Paper Doll Peace. So a Paper Doll Peace is that everybody, regardless of their socioeconomic situation, has access to a piece of paper. You know, even if it's just a bit of used newspaper, and you can fold it 7 times and cut out paper dolls. And the paper dolls can represent people that you can approach for peace, but like what we did with Lay Down Your Arms. I mean, this is you individually reaching out to the people that you can to make peace with. So you have a loving conversation with somebody, or if it's someone that you're in really that you can't stand, then you just send them, like, you know, peaceful energy to try and help shift them to creating the peace that we need. So these are a few other examples of different paper dolls. You can do whatever way you want. But the idea is, and I haven't got any images of this, but we had after Christchurch, loads of kids did this. So, you know, it's a really good process to go through for, you know, being able to do something in a situation where you feel like you're powerless. This way, you're taking your power back, and you're identifying who it is that you can individually reach out to, because actually you can create the peace. You can be world peace. So, and we can't do. Also, meditation. You know, just allowing yourself to breathe, taking time to breathe. Box breathing's a great thing, where you just breathe in for 4, a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, and then do that 4 times. And, you know, do that before you come into any conflict situation or when something comes up, because that will help aid you and bring peace to you and the people. All of these are kind of symbols of how we connected, you know, and in the same way that with the, you know, with horses and with alternative to violence projects and all those different things, you can learn different tools. Like I've learned clean language from working with horses, non-violent communications, useful alternative violence project. Karanga has been a huge influence in my life, because learning to call, using our voice, trying to make peace. Remembering after COVID as well that fear is the big enemy. So if you can kind of harness that and recognize that fear is an enemy, but an enemy is only another me. So just hold on to that, let go of the fear, fill that space with love, and send that love out around the world. And then that's when we get peace. And it sounds airy fairy, but you know what? It actually does work. So think peace take a big deep breath. I'm sending you loads of love. And if you can reach out and make peace with as many people as you can, that would be awesome. Thank you very much. Go well.
Thank you very much, Deidre. I think you're here with us today, and thank you for pre-recording that. So next we are going to hear from Claire Woodham and her friends. Claire is a former South Pacific anti-nuclear activist and Pramazon, and has actively taken refuge in the teachings of Buddha, and she leads Tara dancing, meditations and study sessions on internal disarmament. And so we're going to the beautiful Buddha Centre in Napier, and over to you, Claire. Thank you. You're unmuting, are you? You need to unmute. Yes, thank you. Good.
It's so lovely to be part of this beautiful day. Can you hear us okay? Great. So I'm here today with my friends Christina Faiteri Roberts and Charmaine. And we're just filled up, sometimes a bit mucky, about the treasures that have been shared today, the love that's all part of this movement. And we're really happy to support this peace initiative. So yeah, in the 80s, I was part of the anti-nuclear movement in Auckland, and part of organising weekly peace band sessions out supermarkets to get the national government out and the Labour government in, and just educating people about what was happening in the world nuclear-wise. And from there, we were really inspired by the Green and Common Action to create our own Devonport Peace Camp. That was a forum for people to come together and discuss what it meant to be part of a world in which nuclear proliferation was happening, and the weapons were bristling against each other. And then that culminated in a 20,000 strong women's peace march up Queen Street. This is in 1982. Yeah, and so through that process, we really, as a small group of talkers and thinkers and musicians and actors, became very aware of the colonization that we were inheriting as a white privileged Pākehā in Aotearoa, and also aware of the ongoing colonization that was happening in our own land, as well as what was happening in the Pacific in terms of the French testing their bombs in Mururoa, British having tested in the Marshall Islands, etc., etc. So earlier this week, we were very happy to go and see the Mothers of the Revolution, that film that started and showed the power for me of women coming together, of sharing their despair, and of that despair turning into information and empowering each other. And in a way, that's kind of what's happened for my life, coming face to face with the nuclear problem, doing what I could with my friends against it, being successful in bringing Longi government into power and all the changes that he brought about, and then facing our own role as colonizers, and then, okay, what do we do about this? So in that process, a lot of us got burnt out and blew up with each other, and our friends, older friends around, said, you've got to take care of yourselves. You really got to take care of yourself when you're a warrior. And it was shortly after that I started my training in herbal medicine, and then again with that finding meditation practices that really help to create inner peace and to let go of all the raru, all the feelings that were constantly there and easily triggered. So here I am 40 years later in this Buddhist center, where we every week we do dance meditations that are about bringing in power and wisdom and compassion to our lives, so that we can be actively engaged without coming from a base of emotions that cause more unrest, that cause more division, so that we can be more careful about what we say and how we speak it and how we hold our silence. So these Buddhist practices, I love to dance and to move, and this particular type of Buddhist practice is open to anyone to come in and to connect with the power of being creative, of using our whole body, all the elements within our body, the earth, fire, water, and air within our bodies, to bring about change in our lives and in the lives of others. So we're going to do a little dance, and you can all join in. It's called a dance of motivation. And let's see if this is going to work.
So Claire, we'll show a little bit of this, and we're running out of time. We might have to cut off halfway. I'm sorry. Thank you.
We've lost the audio. We've pretty much lost the audio.
Okay. Thank you so much, Claire. That's beautiful. If you want to find out more about Tara dancing, then we can send you a link. And now we're going to come into the different world, the world of Julian Assange. And before we hear from Matt O'Brennan, we're going to show you a little bit of the trailer of the film Ithaca. Thank you, Ashley.
Your contact with Julian through his childhood was part of the story, I think.
It isn't part of the story.
Yeah.
The story is that, I'm attempting in my own modest way to get Julian out of the ship.
Julian Assange is the hero of our time. He was the darling of the left. All of a sudden, he's a puppet of Russia.
My name is John Shipton. I'm Julian Assange's father.
WikiLeaks found that Julian Assange has been arrested.
One of the most notorious and controversial figures in custody.
Assange will remain behind bars until that extradition hearing, which has been set down for the end of February.
I urge the Department of Justice to drop the charges.
The maximum jail sentence of 175 years.
Because he published the truth.
How does it feel to be the father of such a controversial figure, somebody who's known around the world?
Was that him on the phone before?
Yeah.
What are you talking about on a kind of regular basis?
If Julian is extradited to the United States to face these charges, he will be the first, but not the last.
What are your worst fears?
That it just collapses under the strain.
It looks as though what journalists do for a living is seen to be a criminal act.
Shipton, keep it up, man.
Thank you.
I wish I had your energy, I really do.
I'm done. I'm done. I mean, I'm fucking doing out.
Why do you think there's not a great public love and support?
This is really truly a good question.
What's at stake? If he goes down, so will journalism.
But if people walked away from this film understanding you, how would you feel about that?
We're here, and this has only come about because we have a child in the ship, and we want to get him out.
I'd like to welcome Matt O'Brennan, the National Coordinator of Aotearoa for Assange, and who they are committed, along with many people in the world, to freeing Julian Assange and protect our vital right to know the truth about war crimes and illegal invasions. And we're running out of time, Matt, so welcome, and a few words from you would be wonderful. Thank you.
Kia ora all, and thank you, Liz, and thank you, WorldBeyondWar, for this opportunity to speak to you about our campaign for Julian. Why Julian Assange? What has he got to do with peace? So, we've heard many different wonderful approaches today to peace. They're all vital, and they all contribute. And, from Parihaka nonviolence, which inspired Gandhi, to the nuclear-free movement here in New Zealand in the 60s. And these are all vital, and nonviolent communication, which is something I'm committed to as well. So thank you all for these wonderful sharings. And but I'd just like you to consider one vital question. With all these things that we can achieve peace, there's one crucial element that we have to have peace, and that is the truth. Julian Assange famously said that in studying the wars of the last 50 years, the thing that he found was that they were all started with some kind of lie to the public in order to get public support for wars that they otherwise wouldn't agree to. A recent example would be the Iraq War, of course, where they professed to have evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, when in fact the United Nations weapon inspector said they did not find any such evidence. And the result is the deaths of millions of innocent people. And it's hard to hold space for that, but that is a fact. And Julian decided to do something about that. He said that if wars can be started with lies, peace can be started with truth. And it is vital that we maintain our right to know the truth. And our right to know the truth currently sits with Julian Assange in Belmarsh Prison in London, maximum security prison. He's literally charged with the crime of publishing evidence of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan and torture at Guantanamo Bay. That is literally what he is facing charges for doing. Every major human rights organization and press freedom organization in the world, including Amnesty International, Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner, and Reporters Without Borders and the United Nations Special Rapporteurs have all said that this is a major threat to global press freedom and our right to know the truth about war crimes. So that's why we're campaigning Free Julian. That's why I call on all of you to find out about this case. Go and see the movie Ithaca, which is winning awards in Australia. It's just been premiering, and it's showing today in Auckland. So we're going to head down to the Civic today and see that. Julian Assange's father will be zooming in for a Q&A with the audience to get behind this case and tell your MPs to stand for Julian Assange. And that's what I believe New Zealand can do next, is to stand with Australia and call for Julian Assange to be brought home to protect our right to know the truth and in order to have peace.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's awesome. And well done for all your amazing work. And of course, World Beyond War totally supports the call to free Julian. Now, we are running behind. We've only 9 minutes to the hour. We've still got a load to get through. We're going to have to do a quick cut. But next, we're going to come to a video compilation from the Soka Gakkai International Movement, who do wonderful work with children, peace art exhibitions, and many other wonderful things.
Clouds veiling the moonlight, drifting in the dark night, searching for the light, refusing to give in.
First to see the sunrise, illuminating the dark skies, revealing the strength existing within me. Sailing in the vast blue ocean, facing roars of the raging seas.
No matter how hard it may be, still I am not defeated.
Now is the time
to stand up alone.
I am the one
creating waves of hope.
Now is the time
to stand up alone.
I am the one
Hi everyone, I am Timmy Barabbas and I am the founder of the Rise for Lives movement. Nelson Mandela once said, "A winner is a dreamer who never gives up." And now, I wish to introduce you to some amazing young people who are determined to change the world.
We are here to stand together to give voices to those who aren't being heard.
Decided to wait no longer and stand up for the millions of people suffering in the world's largest humanitarian crisis, the Yemeni war.
Over 20 million people in Yemen don't have access to food, water, or other necessities required for survival, yet people tend to ignore it, leading to the deaths and suffering of millions of children.
Can you imagine the millions of tears you'd shed if you had to wake up and find your child in that position? No, because you don't even want to imagine. Though that's the reality for children in Yemen, begging for your help and a bit of food to eat.
We'd like to spread messages of peace, love, care and unity. Our movement supports no violence and our aim is to instill hope in the hearts of young people.
As we plan for Christmas around the world, do you know that in one country, a man-made humanitarian crisis has entered its 6th year? And almost 16 million people wake up hungry every day. We wish to change that, and we need your help to do so. So please join us and fight for the lives of Yemenis.
Let's show the same love to Yemen that we've shown to others alike. We're all capable of loving and making a change.
Enough is enough. It's time for unity and love. Let's stand together and do what is right.
Let's give a voice to those who are being silenced. Let's give them an opportunity to pursue their rights and to stand up on their own 2 feet.
We are also holding different types of fundraisers such as bake sales and mufti days to raise money for organisations such as Save the Children, to help raise money and support what they're doing in both Yemen and other humanitarian crises all around the world.
On top of that, we are starting our own global Youth Voice Resolution that will be listing actions the United Nations and other governments around the world should take to help resolve the conflict in Yemen and help the people.
This global Youth Voice Resolution will be presented to the United Nations and other governments around the world.
What are you waiting for? Join us. You have the power to save millions of people's lives. Let's stand together in love and unity.
Let's show the world that together we can make it right. Together we are going to make it right. Please help. Join us.
You can help us by donating to our national fundraising page, spreading the word about our movement, joining our teams across New Zealand to help organise the first Peace Walks and fundraisers, and joining us on the day of our first National Peace Walk in New Zealand, the 27th of February 2021.
Thank you to Timmy Barabbas, who is the coordinator of Rise for Lives. And with only a few minutes to spare, it's thank you to everybody. And we're going to finish with this amazing Cancel Rimpak poem created by 13 Indigenous poets from Oceania, from Hawaii, Aotearoa and Guaham, which was directed and edited by Maiki Inoue. Ka kita, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Without Rimpak, Papa will bear down smiling through the pain of birth, no longer afraid of losing her child to bombs. She will breathe, and we will breathe. Yeah.
In a world without Rimpak, there is breath enough to stand against the torpedoing teeth, the amphibious assaults, underwater explosions, the nuclear bombs and billions of dollars and bullets of peacetime that continue elsewhere. Breath enough to salve these and so many wounds, to sing so loud we drown all submarine sonar.
In a world without war games on our watery blue body, there is no place for hungry egos, no place for triggering weapons into the belly of the rich, vast blue Moana, because she will breathe. Free, freely, freedom, chanting, my body is not your playground.
In a world without militarization,
Words like colonization and occupation become words used in the past tense. What possibilities emerge when we are free? Islands as space for creative growth and true security. The entire Pacific Ocean unafraid to breathe.
In a world without nuclear warfare, Tahitian, Marshallese, Hawaiian, Indigenous lives would be celebrated without hierarchy based on dollars and euros, without fear for our smallness or isolation, needing the protection of empire, unfurling a pandemic of radiation, contamination, and sickness. All lives would be created equal.
In a world without deception, no one believes that security is a function of bullets.
In a world without naval sonar, a song returns from the vast assembly of cerulean gods to an altar of coral and island anchored to this blue chorus. From the depths of obscurity, Kanaloa Auhe'e, a tubulous mele from which we all do our living. The source is stable, Ola.
In a world without war, no child will bear a ballistic horizon, only clouds, skies, waves will thunder.
In a world without appropriation, our language will be unstolen. Te mana, te kaha, rest from the crest of Her Majesty New Zealand ships of war.
In a world without naval frigates, Eva traverses the Royal Moana Nui, the Star Command blue sky merging into the navy blue Pacific. Kiwa fishes for islands across the ultramarine, hauling up Hawaii, necessary respite.
In a world without war, we wouldn't have to wonder if we'd wake to bombs being dropped on our villages, or question if our hanam was clean enough to drink, our golai safe enough to eat. No trespassing signs and fence lines wouldn't dictate the journeys of our tano and our tasi. We'd be islanders connecting through constellations and canoes, sitting under coconut trees, sharing origin stories, chewing kuha, brown bodies dancing, islander hearts beating, ancestral dreams come true.
In a world without bombs, we honor generations of Ike. We seed forests of koa. We stand in the malu of our sacred mountains, plant our ieve in the frigid waters. We stare back at Aina and see our reflections, kneel down and are fed. In a world without bombs, we rise from the sea they tried to conquer. Ea mai ke kai mai.
In a world without militancy, silk breaths line her womb. Finally, she can breathe.
Wonderful job by New Zealand. Moving on, unfortunately, immediately and belatedly to Japan and then Korea. If you're on here for Korea, please contact me in the chat. If there are people who need to be made co-hosts and haven't, please let me know in the chat or by speaking up. If you are a co-host, I'm going to, if you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, I am stopping and restarting the live streams, so catch the new ones. Let's go to Japan.
Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day.